course I forgot creamer. Get locked in, I guess. Oh, hey, morning, Joe. How's it going? Another day, another dollar. Yeah, right. Wait. Pause. How many of us have started our day just like that? Or even worse, the very first thing after we set that alarm clock off in the morning, the very first thing is a thought, something like, God, I don't want to go to work today. Or something else along the lines of, well, I guess I'm just here, aren't I? Or when someone asks you how your day's going, the best you could muster is, it's another day that ends in day, I guess. Yeah, sure. But these are the silent killers of your work. They creep in quietly, disguised as honesty, but they steal from you in ways that you rarely notice. They don't just ruin your mood, they rob your sense of purpose. Think about it. They make your life smaller. By convincing you that your work doesn't matter and that your effort is a chore, and that you are just surviving the clock until freedom rings at 5 o'clock. Pretty rough. But here's the thing. Work isn't the enemy. The system might be frustrating and the bosses might not get the point. In fact, the tasks might even feel thankless. But the idea of work itself, the labor of your hands, the motion of your effort, that's sacred. So what holds us back from giving our best? From showing up as our fullest selves? Usually it's that sense that our work doesn't matter, that no matter how much we pour in, it won't be enough to change anything. We think the system's too big, or the culture's too integrated. The problem's too high above my pay grade. Yeah, how many times have we heard that? So instead, we start cutting corners thinking, if the system's broken, why should I give it my all? But here's the paradox I want to challenge you with today. What if the only way to change the system is to give 110%? What if transformation doesn't start with rebellion, but with excellence? Heck, what if the quiet defiance of doing things right even when no one's watching is actually the most powerful form of resistance you have? You see, people think that cutting corners is efficiency. It's not. It's passing the burden. When you skip a step to save yourself time, someone else has to pick it up after you. Maybe it's your coworker, your manager, or the next shift. But those steps don't vanish into thin air. They roll downhill. And that's not efficiency. That's entropy. That's why I always say the steps you cut are the ones someone else has to pick up after you. It's not about micromanaging or moralizing. It's about honoring the unseen thread that connects your effort to everyone else's. Because whether you realize it or not, you are part of something bigger than your role or your paycheck. As much as we wish, the place that we work at didn't appear out of thin air. And in fact, someone before you built it. Someone who had to take risks, make sacrifices, and lay the groundwork that you now stand on. You might not like how they run it. You might even think that they're power hungry and out of touch. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you weren't working here, you'd still be working somewhere under someone else's system, wouldn't you? And if you call what they're doing evil, yet you still collect a paycheck from it, you are not standing against it. You're sustaining it. That realization can sting, but it's also freeing. We know because if you can't control the system, you can still control your spirit within it. Here's another principle I teach often that might clear this up a little bit. Don't get caught in the brambles. Everyone has their thorns. Those daily irritation, unfair workloads, or coworkers who just don't seem to care, no matter how much you try. But when you walk into work, you have the unique opportunity to say, I'm going to come in ready to give it my best and not get bogged down by the thorns that caught everyone before me. That choice, that refusal to let frustration dictate your performance is one of the strongest forms of integrity. And here's why. Labor comes before fruit. You don't get to the harvest before you've tended the fields. You don't get promoted before you've mastered your role. You don't see change before you've modeled it. In other words, the fruit never grows before the labor is done. So before we go any further, I want you to sit with this question. What if the way to change your workplace, your culture, and even your life isn't to wait for freedom, but to create it by how you serve within what's already in front of you? Because maybe, just maybe, your excellence is the revolution the system never saw coming. All right, now I understand that all of that's a pretty weighty statement, but if you stick with me a little bit longer, let's pull back the lens. Because to understand why work feels so heavy today, we have to ask where that weight came from. Work, labor, wasn't always seen as a curse. In ancient Greece, manual work was often left to slaves. True. But the philosophers, the thinkers, saw labor as proof of a rational mind's ability to shape the world. Aristotle spoke of praxis, deliberate action guided by wisdom. Work, when done with intention, wasn't drudgery. It was participation in the divine order of things. Then came Rome, and labor became law. The empire was a machine, and its citizens became gears. Even so, Roman thinkers like Cicero still wrote that labor omnia vicit, work conquers all. They believed that through effort, even common people could rise. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and something changed. Work stopped being an act of creation and became a measure of output. Machines made it faster, cheaper, and more efficient, but also more soulless. The worker became a number. The paycheck became proof of worth. That's where the fracture began, when productivity replaced purpose. Excellence started feeling like submission. When you strip soul from labor, you breed resentment. But here's where philosophy gives us a thread of hope. In nearly every culture that's survived long enough to write down its wisdom, there's an understanding that labor is sacred when it serves something higher. The Egyptians built monuments, not just for kings, but to honor eternity. The medieval stonemasons carved beauty into ceilings no one would ever see, simply because God would see. The early monks copied manuscripts by hand, line by meticulous line, not for the praise, but for the preservation, for the love of truth itself. Each of these saw work not as a toil, but as service. And service, true service, is where meaning hides. Now look at modern work culture. We glorify the grind, but we detest the day job. We chase meaning while complaining about labor. We want reward without the rhythm that produces it. And somewhere along the line, we started thinking freedom meant doing less. But here's the paradox buried in the bones of history. Work has always been the price of freedom. The Hebrews knew this intimately. When Moses demanded, "Pharaoh, let my people go," he didn't say, "so they can be free." He said, "Let my people go so they may serve their God in the wilderness." Freedom wasn't the absence of labor. It was the right to choose whom you labor for. Every civilization at its best has grappled with that truth. The question isn't whether you'll serve, it's what you'll serve. Serve money, and you'll always feel poor. Serve ego, and you'll always feel small. Serve excellence, and you'll always feel driven, but never satisfied. Serve something higher, truth, goodness, love, and suddenly work becomes worship. When the medieval craftsmen laid bricks for cathedrals that would take generations to finish, they knew they'd never see the completed roofs. But they didn't work for completion. They worked for contribution. Maybe that's a missing link in our culture today. We want to change the world, but we've forgotten that the world changes when ordinary people do ordinary things with extraordinary care. Care is costly, It means giving 110% when no one's watching. It means laboring not because the system is perfect, but because you are shaping something higher within it. Because maybe excellence isn't the system's reward, it's the system's antidote. So before we rush to blame the corporations, the management, the system, or the grind, maybe we should look at the foundations of all civilizations that have stood the test of time and ask, what made them thrive? It wasn't ease of their work. It was the dignity within their labor. I mean, that maybe that's where we rediscover what work was always meant to be. Not a sentence, but a sanctuary. So now that we've pulled back the curtain on where our ideas of work came from, let's get practical. Because there has to be a way to test this idea, right? If the paradox is that the only way to change the system is to give your all within it, then we need tools or mental frameworks to keep ourselves steady while we do that. Because make no mistake, giving 110% in a world that doesn't always value excellence can wear a person down. So let's anchor ourselves in 3 principles that I have used to keep myself and many that I've taught rooted when everything else seems pointless. The first one we've already talked about before, but let's get a little more useful with it. Labor comes before fruit. This one is simple, but it's probably the hardest to live by. Every harvest starts in hiddenness. You plant, water, and weed. But for a long time, you see nothing. And that's when most people give up because it's a little disheartening. We've been trained to expect instant feedback, such as likes, promotions, and recognition. But real value doesn't work on those human timelines. I tell people that all the time. You don't expect fruit to grow if you've never planted the seeds. You don't expect those seeds to grow if you've never tended to the soil. And you don't expect that soil to bear anything if you've never fed it. Work is the exact same way. The labor always comes first. The fruit, such as the promotions, the mastery in your role, or the trust from your coworkers or your boss, that all comes later. And even then, that fruit isn't just yours. It feeds others. It's something that's shared, both in its value and in where it came from. It's the first shift that we need to make in our thinking. We have to stop asking ourselves, why am I not getting the reward yet? And instead, we need to start asking ourselves, am I tending this field faithfully? Because when you're faithful in labor, even unseen labor, something begins to grow inside you that no paycheck can measure. And that's character. That's where your real value comes from. The next is the horizon test. When you're deep in the grind and frustrated, tired, or feeling overlooked, lift your eyes. Ask yourself, what am I serving right now? If your work serves something higher than your comfort or your boss's metrics, if it serves growth, truth, or the betterment of someone else, then it's sacred. That's the horizon test. I've used this test my entire life. If what I'm doing doesn't serve a higher horizon, it's time to realign. But if it does, even if it's tough, even if no one notices, then I know I'm moving in the right direction. There's a story I love from history that just puts this all in a single cup of tea. When President Kennedy visited NASA in 1962, he met a janitor mopping the floor. Kennedy asked him, quite simply, what are you doing? And the man replied with something deeper than that. I'm helping put a man on the moon. That's a horizon test in action. He wasn't just mopping the floor, he was putting a part of humanity's leap forward into the stars as his forward. That work was humble, but the vision was infinite. So ask yourself, what's your moonshot? What horizon makes your struggle worth it? And the last test is a perspective test. You have to check your ripples. It's one that humbles me every time I teach it, but it works. It's easy to believe that our work exists in a vacuum, but it doesn't. Every ripple, every action ripples outwards. When I tell people that the steps you cut are the ones that someone else has to pick up after you, it's not just about having a good work ethic. It's about the legacy that your work provides. Cutting corners doesn't just make your job easier today, it makes someone else's job harder tomorrow. And if you're serious about changing systems, you can't create new problems while trying to fix old ones. That's the perspective test. Look at your work and ask, who inherits this? If your effort today sets someone else up to thrive tomorrow, you've succeeded. And it's not just the big stuff, it's every little action. Maybe it's the way you restock a shelf, document a process, or train a new hire, or even show grace when somebody else drops the ball. Every one of those actions sends ripples. You may never see where they go, but they do matter. So when you step into work tomorrow, here's what I want you to remember. Labor comes before fruit. So tend to your field faithfully. Test your horizon and make sure that you're serving something higher than yourself. Check your ripples because your excellence or neglect will echo further than you can imagine. These tools won't just make you a better worker, they'll make you a better builder, and every single one of them can be put into action and tested to see if this paradox holds true. Because the paradox of work isn't about earning more or getting ahead. It's about learning to see the sacred in the ordinary and realizing that your labor isn't just a paycheck, it's participation in the betterment of the world. And when each of us start working that way, that's how the system changes, ultimately. There's this line in Scripture that's haunted and guided me for years. That which you do to the least of these, you do unto me. It's one of those truths that sits at the intersection of faith and labor, where the mundane becomes the divine. Because in that single verse, Christ redefines the entire concept of work and service. When you hand somebody their order, when you teach a student, when you repair a line in a factory, or even when you clean up after others, you're not just doing your job, you're serving something infinitely higher. You're serving the image of God in another person. That's why service, at its core, is freedom. Like we've said before, when Moses went before Pharaoh, he didn't say, "Let my people go so that they could do whatever they want." He said, "Let my people go so that they may serve the Lord in the wilderness." Again, freedom wasn't about the end. It was about the means to serve rightly, to labor in alignment with divine purpose. We often think of service as a kind of submission or a lesser state. But Scripture flips that upside down. Service is not enslavement. It's the act of aligning your will to something eternal. It's saying, I will labor not for my own comfort, but for the good that endures thereafter. And that's where the real reward of work begins. Because labor, done in the right spirit, always bears fruit, even if it's not seen in your lifetime. The New Testament is filled with this quiet insistence that every act, every humble gesture, and every unseen task has eternal weight. Paul says in Colossians 3:23, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." And that's the test. Are you working for men or for meaning? When you start to see labor through that lens, the frustration shifts. Suddenly your job stops being just a grind and it starts to become a form of worship. Even if your workplace is chaotic, your excellence is still sacred. Your consistency is still a testimony, and your grace under pressure still reflects the divine. And I'll be honest with you, this perspective doesn't come easy. I've had my seasons of bitterness. I've had the mornings where I've muttered, "Another day, another dollar," and I meant every tired syllable. But every time I caught myself there, I found the same quiet truth waiting on the other side. It's about escaping what we thought was the problem and transforming it. When you work as though your effort itself is an offering, when you treat every single task, even the smallest one, as a contribution to something greater, you find that kind of peace that can't be bought. That's the work paradox, and honestly, that's faith. The more we give ourselves in service, the freer we become. The more we focus on excellence rather than recognition, the more deeply we change the system we're a part of. Because systems don't reform themselves. People reform them. One act of faithful labor at a time. And maybe that's what we've been missing all along. Maybe freedom was never about getting away from the work, but about finding joy within it. because you know who you're working for. So when you step into work the next day, don't just show up to survive it. Show up to serve it, to shape it, and to sanctify it. Because labor, when done in service of truth and goodness, becomes more than just toil. It becomes testimony. And in that, you find the deepest paradox of all, that the act of giving your all in a broken system is the first step towards healing it. That work, when done in love, is no longer the enemy of rest. It's the expression of purpose. Now, I know we've talked about the paradox of this episode in a few different formats and a few different ways, but really that's just in the hopes that it'll resonate with you. The best way that I've put it in here, that I've found, is that the paradox is the only way to change the system is to give your all within it, not to rebel against it. And so keep that in mind. Try to do your best to think on it and to actually test it. I've given you several actionable ways that you can actually go out into the real world and see if this is true. It may take a long time, but after, give it 6 months, a year, 2 years of putting this into action in your work, you'll see a change. People will gravitate towards the character that you become, because you aren't just being there to be there. You're there for them, and people notice that. So, to everybody that's asked me my entire life while I've worked my butt off, why do you work so hard when the job doesn't care? It's because I don't care about the job either, and I'm not doing it for the job. I'm not even doing it for the business or for that company that we like to refer to as almost like another person or a being. I'm doing it instead for every single individual that makes up that company, that makes up the work and the effort that I am doing for my community. It's the only way that I've been able to really hold myself to a standard. And that standard has transformed the other people that I've come into contact with. So, if you've ever asked me why, now you know. It may have taken 20 minutes to really explain it, but I wanted to do my best to do it justice. Give it your all and see what happens.